Hello, my name is Alexis DeLauder, and today I will be presenting about enhancing fairness and accuracy in hiring through structured interviews. Choosing the right candidate for a job position is a critical aspect of the employment process, especially since proper staffing is essential for an organization to run effectively. People truly do make the place, and a bad hire can easily disrupt the overall culture of a company. Not only does staffing contribute to the overall culture of a company, it can also affect the cost of business since employee costs are typically over 22% of an organization's total revenue. While it may seem like an easy task to hire someone, there are many different strategies to consider when developing the interview process. Will the company hire internally or externally? How many applications will the company accept before making a final decision? Perhaps the most important decision is how the company will conduct the interview process in order to find the perfect candidate. Will they aim for an unstructured interview or a structured interview? First, let's discuss what an unstructured interview is. An unstructured interview focuses on open discussion to evaluate the candidate instead of asking systemized questions. This type of interview is known to be subjective in nature, more casual and informal, and the questions are typically spontaneously thought of by the person who is conducting the interview. Proponents of unstructured interviews feel like they are more personable and less systematic due to the flow of the questions asked. However, since the questions are not systematically asked, each candidate may receive different questions. This can cause the conversation to take a completely different direction for each candidate, which can be confusing when the interviewer tries to look back on the interview and remember specific answers to questions. Because of this, final selection of the candidate tends to be somewhat random and may not have anything to do with how the candidates will be able to perform the specific job duties that are actually required. The lack of structured questions can lead to a higher risk of bias, subjective hiring decisions, and a poor alignment between the candidate's skills and the job's requirements. Unstructured interviews can also lead to legal challenges regarding discrimination and fairness. Stereotypes can be formed around gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or even disabilities that a candidate possesses. Ultimately, the interviewer may even attempt to match their own stereotypic beliefs by hiring the candidate that is most similar to them or that shows similar beliefs. This can easily create a discrimination lawsuit. Despite this, unstructured interviews remain to be utilized more than structured interviews across many organizations. Now that we've talked about unstructured interviews, let's get into structured ones. Structured interviews consist of predetermined questions that are asked to all candidates. Then, answers are ranked according to a set scale. The questions asked typically relate to specific aspects of the job instead of the more spontaneous, informal questions that unstructured interviews usually consist of. Opponents of structured interviews typically feel like the interview feels too systematic and doesn't allow the interviewer to get to know the candidate's true personality. However, there are personality-based questions that can be asked during a structured interview so the interviewer can still get to know the candidate better as well. While this method may feel more systematic, it is a more reliable method when choosing the best candidate. There is also evidence that structured interviews have more validity than unstructured interviews. A 1994 study tested the validity of both unstructured and structured interviews. Through this study, it was found that structured interviews had a higher average validity, 0.44, versus unstructured interviews, 0.33, regardless of the content of the interviews when trying to identify which candidates will perform well on the job. Using structured interviews can greatly impact an organization. When better candidates are selected, it ultimately leads to the new hire exhibiting better performance and having higher overall satisfaction with their position. This tends to lead to less voluntary turnover and higher retention, which will save the organization money in the long run. According to a 2012 report, the average cost of employee turnover for organizations is about 1/5 of a worker's salary in order to replace that worker. Jobs that are more complex and have higher levels of specialized training or education can have even higher turnover costs for the organization. When developing protocols for a structured interview, the first step should be to conduct a job analysis to determine what skills and knowledge is required for someone to perform the task. Next, appropriate interview questions should be created that every single candidate will be asked during the interview. Finally, rating scales need to be designed to measure the response that is given by the candidate. Once the interview is over, the organization would then select the candidate with the highest score. While creating questions and a grading scale can feel like a tedious task for an organization, once they are completed, they can be used over and over again for future interviews. Consider a hypothetical dental office that is looking to hire a dental assistant. The dental office's first step would be to analyze exactly what a dental assistant does on a daily basis so that they have a good idea of what tasks the candidate will be expected to complete if hired. In this case, they would be performing infection control tasks, running sterilization, turning over operatories, educating patients on oral hygiene, and assisting the dentist during restorative procedures. An appropriate structured interview question for this position may include: describe your process for preparing an operatory between patients. How do you ensure that you are preparing it in a timely manner without compromising safety? A rating scale would then be created that rates the candidate's responses, which prevents the interviewer from being subjective. An example of this would be to give the candidate 5 points for responding that they follow all CDC recommendations for turning over an operatory to ensure that safety is a top priority and the task is completed in a timely manner. Someone who jokes around and says that they are just rushing through the process without considering safety would only get 1 point for this question, even if the interviewer subjectively thinks it's funny and they are just joking around. The final selection of the candidate that is offered the job should be based on who has the highest score from the structured interview. This will ultimately help to prevent any biased or subjective responses that have nothing to do with the candidate's actual skills. Since the dental assistant with the highest score should be the one who has the knowledge and skills closest to what the office is looking for, they should help improve the performance of the dental office and be more likely to stay working at that office. While it is clear that choosing the right candidate is perhaps the most critical aspect of the employment process, organizations still choose to gamble their finances and retention rates by conducting more unstructured interviews than structured ones. Unstructured interviews not only can lead to hiring unqualified candidates, but also can contribute to low retention rates, ethical concerns, and even discrimination lawsuits due to unfair hiring practices. Structured interviews, on the other hand, help to prevent bias because questions are predetermined and asked to applicants in the same exact manner. The standardized grading scale also helps to ensure that discrimination does not play a part in the process. Structured interviews can also increase retention rates because the candidates selected typically possess the knowledge and skills needed to complete the job, which makes them feel more confident in performing the job and staying with the company. This can also help to save the organization money since employee turnover costs can be a large hit to companies. Not only do structured interviews help save costs, but they can also help shift the overall culture of the organization to be a positive one. Ultimately, structured interviews help organizations to ensure that their hiring practices are fair, consistent, and effective. Thank you very much. I hope you were able to learn a little bit about how structured interviews can increase the overall fairness and accuracy in the hiring process.